Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try to move us out of agribusiness to agroecology in 15 minutes. Planet Earth today is largely planet farm, with agriculture our largest biome. Here are the total livestock per square kilometer, including all cattle, chickens, ducks, pigs, sheep, and goats as of 2006. With the attendant biomasses in millions of tons for, from left to right, vertebrate wildlife, livestock, and people. Marius Gilbert's group shows these distributions are tied to ownership, with backyard chicken at top, intensive production by comparison below. Luke Berman's group shows these landscapes are globalized by circuits of capital. We can see on the top row, left to right, our croplands, pasturelands, and forests tied to capital accumulation, with reds accumulating in countries abroad and blues accumulating within country. The same for consumption on the bottom row. These circuits are imprinting themselves on the microscopic. Martha Nelson's group inferred the spatial jumps of swine influenza country to country, as counted through all swine influenza evolutionary trees, all genomic segments, all lineages from one location to another. We see that for hog, China, in the bottom half there of countries of origin, is not an important source of swine influenzas on the global stage, as most of its hog is purchased domestically. The U.S., on the other hand, the leading global exporter of hog, is also the leading global exporter of swine flu. The circuits of capital are imprinting upon the ecological, with intensive agriculture directly, and by pesticides, fertilizers, deforestation, habitat loss, and introduced species, by far representing the most responsible cause for global insect declines. The circuits of capital are also imprinting upon the geological. Here, the proportions contributed to global greenhouse emissions by sector in kilograms per carbon dioxide equivalent. In hog and chicken, industrial production drives the problem if only by dint of the numbers of animals produced, but also by feed and fertilizer use, manure production, energy use, and meat processing. At finer scales, we can see the impacts built into the physical and social landscapes, as demonstrated here by the reds of 1,000+ head of Iowa hog and the greens of 500 to 1,000 head. Manure lagoons pothole the countryside, increasingly emptied of its human population in favor of monoculture livestock, sheds, and commodity crops. The waste produced is astonishing. Here is Iowa's untreated livestock waste as measured in nitrogen, phosphorus, and total solids, mapped out in city and state equivalents. The state's North Raccoon, Floyd, and Little Sioux watersheds, home to only 350,000 people total, host the waste equivalent of Tokyo, New York City, and Mexico City combined. These obvious materialisms extend far beyond the real of the supply line, and into the more abstract but no less enzymatic. A Chicago of waste in Iowa is driven in part by Chicago itself, hundreds of miles away. The Chicago Bulls, the basketball team, is named after the city's history as a market center for livestock production and trade. If you turn the team's logo upside down, it looks like a robot screwing a crab. Yes, the livestock futures market at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where tech fucks nature. By a modern futures market of 19th century origins, livestock and poultry are now financialized alive. The animals are committed to fungibilities months before their actual births. These commitments extend beyond their mere identities as commodities on the trading floor. Species are treated as asset classes subject to price volatilities, favored as ontologically realer than the ecological or epidemiological dynamics into which the actual animals will eventually be born. As a result, breeding, birth, and livestock and development are logistically bent to servicing these market projections first. For instance, China's privately owned Guangxi Yangxiang Company is adding to its 2 7-story style breeding operations a 13-story hog hotel in which to raise 1,000 head per floor. Poultry thyroids, another example, have been selected for failing to recognize when poult stomachs are full. As a result, broilers are meeting their much larger target weights, a 400% increase since 1957, in only 6 weeks' time. The meat is added on so fast that poultry suffer musculoskeletal morbidity and psychopathologies, including stress pecking, associated with growing so much meat on so many thousands of birds bunched together. Consolidation and globalization affects the evolution and spread of pathogens. Nearly 3/4 of the world's poultry breeding is in the hands of a few multinationals. The value of the products these primary breeders provide is biologically locked by offering multiplier companies only the males of the male lines and females of the female line. As a result, batches of hybrid chickens, trade secrets, must be continuously purchased. By this industrial cascade, a single-source male chicken can generate millions of broiler progeny. The practice, in effect, removes natural selection as a self-correcting and free ecological service. Any culling upon an outbreak or by farmers in reaction to an outbreak has no bearing on the development of immune resistance to the pathogens identified, as these birds, broilers and layers alike, are unable to reproduce on site and evolve in response in real time. In other words, the failure to accumulate natural resistance to circulating pathogens is built into the industrial model before a single outbreak occurs. So efforts to prevent such outbreaks are instead organized around sadistic practices evocative of Dr. Moreau. Specific pathogen-free offspring aren't born, they're built. Sows that are on the cusp of farrowing are euthanized en masse before or after delivery by terminal hysterectomy. Their uteri are removed and placed in humidicribs or doused in antiseptic before the piglets are removed from their uterus casing. Piglets are then isolated and some medically induced into early weaning. We're talking about going to any lengths but shifting the business model that selects for the pathogens to begin with. Externalizing costs is extended from farm animal to farmer. Farmers who have survived waves of consolidation are subject to sharecropper-like expropriation. Darren Qualman reported that from 1985 to 2016, transnational agribusiness captured 98% of Canadian farmers' revenues by extracting out, in blue, almost all value of the value chain by forcing farmers to overcapitalize on inputs and settle for monopolistic pricing upon sale, leaving a nation of farmers very little for themselves, there in green and some years collectively even in red. Such a system continues by virtue of the kind of political power that extends beyond the existential metabolic rifts it produces between economy and ecology. Agribusiness is a suburban phenomenon that turned rurality into a series of fictitious commodities. Topsoil, fresh water, natural pest control, among other resources, have been so degraded by conventional agriculture as to be reconceived as competitors, to be replaced by fertilizers, pesticides, lab meat, and other lucrative technological substitutions. Even what's inside the farmers' heads, their understanding of the fields they worked for decades, is now being monetized by precision agriculture and big data that conglomerates are now selling back to farmers. That power is embodied by a network of lock-ins that positively reinforce each other. Feed the world narratives, compartmentalize thinking, export economics, etc. Value accrues, to quote the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, to a limited number of actors, reinforcing their economic and political power, and thus their ability to influence the governance of food systems, end quote. That is, contrary to eco-modernist Kant, modes of production are not divided from relations of production. Technology here helps reproduce capital power. IPES proposes one way out, recommending a series of interventions that unlock the vicious cycles out of industrial agriculture's favor. Quote, "What is required is a fundamentally different model of agriculture based on diversifying farms and farming landscapes, replacing chemical inputs, optimizing biodiversity, and stimulating interactions between different species as part of holistic strategies to build long-term fertility, healthy agroecosystems, and secure livelihoods." So, for instance, 1. Develop new indicators for sustainable food systems. 2. Shift public support toward diversified agroecological production systems, and so on, intervening in each vicious cycle. But there's a problem. Ultimately, reversing such unequal socio-ecological exchange at the heart of the agro-environmental crisis may be more than a matter of just such thoughtful interventions. The vicious cycles are enforced across a continuum of violences, from structural to state violence. Raj Patel described the Green Revolution, for instance, as the agronomic bayonet at the end of the counterinsurgency gun, as enforced here in Brazil during the dictatorship in the early 1970s. But such touchstones, including Chiquita in Guatemala or Operation Produce in Indonesia, have since been superseded by the U.S. military agribusiness development teams in Afghanistan, for instance. Here, the Kansas agribusiness team deploys to Lagman province. Here, the Nebraska agribusiness team on the ground over there. Or their Orders 24, 27, and 81 under Coalition Provisional Authority rule, opening Iraq to foreign seed breeders and prohibiting Iraqi farmers from reusing seeds of protected varieties. Boots on the ground to suits in the suites, global counterinsurgency has returned with increasing vengeance. In 2017, a team of international legal experts implicated the Netherlands Development Finance Institution and FinFund in the 2016 murder of internationally known Honduran environmental activist Berta Cáceres. The funds pursued a strategy with shareholders, executive managers, and employees of a Honduran hydroelectric project, private security companies working for the project, public officials, and state security agencies, quote, to control, neutralize, and eliminate any opposition to the project. Among the tactics pursued were setting community groups against each other, smear campaigns, infiltrations, surveillance, threats, contract killing, sabotaging communication equipment, and co-optation of justice officials and security forces. Cáceres is only one of many. Global Witness has reported that since 2002, thousands of environmental activists worldwide have been assassinated around agriculture, dams, mining, and logging. In a preliminary analysis we're still working on, our group shows environmental activist deaths in Brazil 2014 to 2018, before Bolsonaro took over, to be statistically associated with Cargill's soy exports, particularly on the Amazonian frontier. Even if Cargill or its subsidiaries didn't pay for the murders, the company benefits from an atmosphere of intimidation. So I can tell you about how intercropping can increase and diversify soil microbiota. I can tell you how cover cropping reduces erosion, fixes atmospheric nitrogen, reduces nitrogen leaching, improves soil health. I can tell you conservation tillage reduces carbon emission, increases soil carbon, decreases erosion, and promotes greater efficient use of available moisture. I can tell you trap crops can be planted to attract and retain pest species off main crops. I can tell you under forest farming and silvopasture, trees can serve as a secondary crop, offer shade for livestock, and capture and retain rainfall. I can tell you tree roots improve soil health and the nutrient quality of forage. I can tell you riparian buffers offer wildlife corridors for all sorts of animals, including pollinators and natural pest control species like birds and bats. Farm runoff is filtered through the buffer, keeping nutrients and pesticides from washing into local streams. I can tell you they contribute to flood and drought control. I can tell you, starting at whatever farm stage, all these efforts put together aim to introduce virtuous cycles at the level of regional food production, building new relationships, mainstreaming agroecology, as measured by an entirely different set of criteria. Instead of net calorie production or yield per hectare, we can measure nutrient content per hectare and nutrient availability for local communities. I can tell you it isn't just about the biophysical, but the social, as on Soul Fire Farm in New York State here. Farmer autonomy, community socioeconomic resilience, circular economies, land trusts, integrated cooperative supply networks, food justice, reparations, and reversing deeply historical race, class, and gender trauma. Healing the metabolic rift as an ecosocialist project, but also, following Elaine Badiou, imprinting a different political philosophy upon the landscape. Out from underneath suburbanist export capital and into integrated regional food landscapes tended by local communities. I can tell you that, yes, against eco-modernist insult, such systems have already been scaled up and scaled out. As Jahi Chappelle has written, Belo Horizonte, a city of 2.5 million in Brazil, showed when outlying farmers have both a market and a price guaranteed in town, cutting out usurious middlemen, they are more likely to engage in agroecological and organic practices back on the farm. They also are more likely to protect primary and secondary forests and plant a variety of crops conducive to biodiversity. I can tell you all that, but all such futurisms depend on winning control of the levers of production and participation. It's where saving Earth must match up with revolutionary resistance. For capital isn't just going to stand down from its infrastructural and ideological apparatus just because it's a good idea. It's long been a lesson the left must repeatedly recover from its own alternate timeline. For one, Amílcar Cabral, the revolutionary hero of Guinea-Bissau, here with a soil map he made in 1951 in his study of the countryside, he connected land, people, and liberation into a higher-order synergy even many agroecologists avoid as a matter of methodological pride. Now, our group is trying to expand science this direction. We recently attacked cost-effectiveness analysis, repeatedly used in epidemiology as a tool of the professional managerial class. As it is used these days, cost-benefit analysis seeks to efficiently deploy the economy of scarcity, treating capital taking its cut first as a natural order of things. Instead, our group combined models of the environmental stochasticity that political institutions can help set to control disease outbreaks, the economic geographies of alternate food systems, and military theory in asymmetric conflict to propose the means by which the commons might defeat agribusiness. We ask, can we liberate community-tended ecosystem services for both the regenerative commons and the resilient landscapes we need to control disease before medical interventions are necessary? Now, never mind the details, but here we show that if an adversary, like a peasant revolt, can impose shadow price lambda beyond the range of agribusiness's material resources and institutional cognition, here compiled in Index Z, the agribusiness's system of control will likely fail. So that's our little contribution. But a liberated landscape won't be won by such simulations alone. It requires a plethora of ongoing agroecologies that intersect with a confrontational politics grounded in community co-determination across scale, from rural town and city neighborhood on up and across these places together. That's all of us, our contribution. So big picture, Marx and Engels offered that we had a world to win. But now we have a planet to win too. Thank you.